Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Wayne. Some people mistake kindness for weakness, patience for stupidity, and accommodation for submission. For years, I had been the husband who bent over backward to keep the peace, who apologized first and compromised most, who chose harmony over being right. But when my wife stormed out that night, thinking she was calling my bluff with another one of her dramatic exit threats, she discovered that even the most patient person has limits. Diana and I had been married for 11 years when everything finally came to a head on one Tuesday evening in March. I believe 11 years were enough to navigate the inevitable challenges that come with combining two lives into one shared existence. But if I'm being completely honest, those years hadn't been characterized by equal partnership or mutual respect. Instead, they had been defined by a pattern of behavior that had slowly eroded my self-respect and turned our marriage into something that resembled a parent-child relationship more than a partnership between equals. Diana had developed, over the course of our marriage, the habit of threatening to end our relationship and move out whenever we had disagreements or whenever I didn't immediately comply with her wishes or demands. These threats had started small and infrequent during our early years together, but had gradually escalated in both frequency and intensity as she learned that they were an effective way to get me to back down from any position I might take that conflicted with her preferences. The pattern was always the same. We would disagree about something, and instead of working through the disagreement with discussion and compromise, Diana would escalate the conflict by announcing that she was done with our marriage and would be leaving. The threat of abandonment was her nuclear option, deployed whenever she wanted to end a conversation on her terms and ensure that she got away. For the sake of maintaining peace in our household and preserving what I believed was the fundamental stability of our marriage, I would inevitably be the one to fold. I would beg her not to leave, apologize for whatever position I had taken that had triggered her threat, and allow her to get her way on whatever issue had sparked the conflict. This cycle had repeated itself hundreds of times over the years, with me consistently choosing temporary peace over standing my ground on any issue that mattered to me. Being the one to compromise and apologize first had allowed our marriage to last for 11 years when it probably should have ended much sooner. But instead of recognizing what I was doing as a sacrifice and an accommodation for the sake of our relationship, Diana had come to see herself as simply being right about everything. In her mind, my willingness to back down wasn't evidence of my commitment to our marriage. It was confirmation that her positions were correct and that I was wrong to ever disagree with her in the first place. This dynamic had fundamentally altered the balance of power in our relationship, creating a situation where Diana felt entitled to make unilateral decisions about our shared life while expecting me to provide the financial and emotional support that made her choices possible. She had learned that she could get her way on virtually any issue by threatening to leave, and I had learned that avoiding conflict was easier than standing up for my own needs and preferences. The most significant example of this pattern occurred over a year ago, when Diana had made the unilateral decision to quit her job at a local insurance agency without consulting me or discussing the financial implications of her choice. She had simply announced one day that she was tired of working and had decided that she deserved to take some time off to focus on herself and explore other opportunities. Diana had been earning a decent amount a year at the insurance agency, which wasn't a fortune but represented a significant portion of our household income. Her salary had covered our grocery bills, utilities, and several other recurring expenses that would now fall entirely on my shoulders. When I had tried to discuss the financial impact of her decision and suggest that we should have planned for this transition together, Diana had immediately escalated to her usual threat pattern. She told me that she had worked for years and deserved a break, that I was being unsupportive of her need for personal growth and career exploration, and that if I couldn't handle supporting our household temporarily, maybe she should just leave and find someone who would appreciate her contributions to our relationship. Faced with this familiar ultimatum, I had once again chosen to back down rather than push the issue. I had agreed to take on the additional financial burden of supporting both of us, while Diana took her indefinite break from employment, telling myself that this was what supportive husbands do, and that she would eventually find work again when she was ready. But it's been over a year since Diana quit her job, and she has shown no signs of actively seeking new employment or contributing financially to our household. Instead, she had settled into a routine of sleeping late, spending her days shopping, watching television, and socializing with friends who were also unemployed or underemployed, treating our home like a luxury hotel where all her needs were met without any expectation of reciprocal contribution. During this period, Diana had also begun making other significant decisions about our shared life without consulting me or considering my input. She had booked expensive spa appointments that she charged to credit card that I paid, and made social commitments for both of us without checking my schedule or asking for my preferences. Each time I attempted to address these unilateral decisions or suggest that we should communicate better about choices that affected both of us, Diana would respond with her familiar pattern of escalation and threats. She would tell me that I was trying to control her, that she was an independent adult who could make her own decisions, and that if I didn't like the way she ran our household during the day while I was at work, she could always give me space. This pattern had created a dynamic where I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home, afraid to voice any opinion or preference that might trigger another round of threats and conflict. I had gradually stopped expressing my needs or concerns, choosing instead to focus on keeping Diana happy and maintaining the surface-level peace that kept our household functioning day to day. The specific incident that finally changed everything between us occurred on a Tuesday evening, when I had been forced to work late due to a critical system upgrade that had encountered unexpected complications. The city's email server had crashed during routine maintenance, and I had spent the afternoon and evening working with my team to restore service and ensure that all data was recovered properly. This type of emergency overtime was an occasional but unavoidable part of my job as a senior network administrator. When critical systems fail, they have to be fixed immediately, regardless of the time or day, and as one of the most experienced technicians on staff, I was usually called in to handle the most complex problems that arose during after-hours incidents. I had called Diana around 4 o'clock to let her know that I would be working late and wouldn't be home at our usual time. She had seemed annoyed by this news, but hadn't made a big issue of it during our brief phone conversation, simply telling me to let her know when I was finished, so she would know when to expect me. The server restoration had taken longer than anticipated, and I hadn't arrived home until nearly 9 o'clock, exhausted from a long day that had started at 7 in the morning and included several hours of intensive troubleshooting under pressure. All I wanted was to take a hot shower, eat something, and relax for a few minutes before going to bed, so I could be ready for another potentially challenging day at work. But immediately after I stepped into our house, before I had even had a chance to set down my laptop bag or take off my jacket, Diana approached me with a request that demonstrated just how little consideration she had for what I had been dealing with that day. She told me that she had been browsing online during the afternoon and had found some clothes that she wanted to buy from a boutique website that was having a limited time sale. The items she wanted would cost about $400, and she needed me to give her my new credit card information so she could complete the purchase, since the old one had expired before the sale ended at midnight. Diana's request was problematic on multiple levels. First, she was asking me to approve a significant discretionary expense without having discussed it in advance or considered whether it fit within our monthly budget. Second, she was making this request immediately upon my arrival home from an unexpectedly long and stressful workday, without any acknowledgement of what I had been dealing with or consideration for my current state of exhaustion. I told Diana that I needed a few minutes to refresh myself first, that I had been working since early morning, and needed to decompress before making any financial decisions. I explained that I would be happy to look at the clothes she wanted to buy and discuss the purchase after I had a chance to shower and eat something, but that I wasn't ready to make any spending decisions at that exact moment. Diana's reaction to my request for a few minutes of transition time was immediate anger and indignation. She told me that the sale was ending soon and that my delay might cause her to miss out on items she really wanted. She seemed to interpret my need for a brief respite after a long workday as a rejection of her request and a lack of consideration for her needs and desires. Despite her obvious irritation, I went upstairs to our bedroom, took off my work clothes, and stepped into the shower, hoping that a few minutes of hot water and privacy would help me transition from the stress of the workday to the relaxation of being home. I spent about 15 minutes in the bathroom, showering and trying to mentally shift gears from problem-solving mode to home mode. When I came back downstairs, refreshed and ready to engage with Diana's request about the clothes she wanted to purchase, I realized something that immediately changed my perspective on our entire domestic arrangement and the balance of contributions in our marriage. During the time I had been upstairs showering, Diana had done nothing to prepare dinner or even start thinking about what we might eat that evening. Despite having been home all day with no work responsibilities or time constraints, despite knowing that I had been dealing with a work emergency and would be arriving home late and tired, she had made no effort to have food ready or even to plan what we might have for our evening meal. This realization hit me with the force of a revelation about how fundamentally unequal our domestic partnership had become. While I had spent my day solving complex technical problems under pressure and earning the money that supported both of our lifestyles, Diana had spent her day browsing shopping websites and expecting me to provide immediate financial approval for her purchases without any reciprocal consideration for my needs or comfort. I confronted Diana immediately about this disparity, asking her why she hadn't thought to prepare dinner during the many hours she had been home while I was dealing with a work emergency. I pointed out that preparing an evening meal would have been a reasonable way to contribute to our household and show consideration for the fact that I was working late. Diana's response was immediate and revealing. She told me that she wasn't my slave who would cook and wash for me, that she was an independent person who shouldn't be expected to perform traditional domestic roles just because she happened to be home during the day. She characterized my expectation that she might prepare dinner as an outdated and sexist assumption about women's responsibilities in marriage. Her response made me furious because it revealed just how entitled and selfish her perspective on our marriage had become. She was perfectly comfortable enjoying the financial benefits of my full-time employment, the house, the credit cards, the lifestyle that my income made possible. But she refused to contribute anything meaningful to our domestic partnership and framed any suggestion that she should do so as oppression. I asked Diana directly whether she considered me to be a slave by providing all of the financial support that made her comfortable with unemployment possible. I pointed out that while she was characterizing household contributions as slavery, she seemed perfectly comfortable with me working full-time to support both of our lifestyles without any expectation that she should contribute financially or domestically to our partnership. The question exposed the fundamental hypocrisy of Diana's position. She wanted the benefits of being financially supported without any of the responsibilities that might reasonably come with that arrangement. She wanted to frame herself as an independent person while being completely dependent on my income for her survival and comfort. Our argument escalated quickly as Diana realized that I was not going to back down from this confrontation the way I had backed down from previous disagreements. Instead of addressing the legitimate points I was raising about the inequality of our domestic arrangement, she moved immediately to her familiar pattern of escalation and threats. Diana announced that she was moving out that night and that I should not contact her again. She delivered this ultimatum with the same dramatic flair and confident expectation that I would fold that had characterized her previous threats over the years. She clearly expected me to immediately shift into apology and negotiation mode, begging her not to leave and agreeing to her terms to prevent the dissolution of our marriage. But something had fundamentally shifted in my willingness to accept this pattern of emotional manipulation and control. The combination of her entitlement, her lack of consideration for my work and contributions, and her immediate resort to threats when challenged had finally pushed me beyond my breaking point. Instead of falling into the familiar pattern of begging and apologizing that had characterized my responses to her previous ultimatums, I looked Diana directly in the eye and replied with a single word that would change the entire trajectory of our marriage. Fine. Diana's reaction to my unexpected response was immediate shock and confusion. She had clearly expected me to follow the script that had worked so effectively for her over the past 11 years, and my calm acceptance of her threat to leave threw her off balance in ways that were obvious and immediate. For several minutes, She seemed to be waiting for me to realize what I had said and begin the usual process of apology and negotiation that would walk back my position and restore her to the dominant position in our relationship dynamic. When it became clear that I wasn't going to modify my response or attempt to prevent her departure, she began the process of making good on her threat. Diana went upstairs and packed a couple of changes of clothes, her toiletries, and a few personal items into a suitcase, apparently expecting that this would be a temporary departure that would shock me into compliance and bring me back to the negotiating table within a day or two. She left our house that Tuesday night with dramatic flair, making sure I understood that this was my last chance to stop her and return to our previous dynamic of conflict avoidance and accommodation. When I made no move to prevent her departure or beg her to reconsider, she actually left, apparently confident that I would change my mind and call her within hours to apologize and ask her to come back. But I couldn't believe she had actually left. After years of empty threats and successful manipulation through the promise of abandonment, Diana had finally overplayed her hand and found herself in the position of having to follow through on threats she had never actually intended to execute. For the first time in 11 years, I had called her bluff and discovered that her threats were primarily tools of manipulation rather than genuine intentions to end our marriage. She had grown so accustomed to using the threat of departure as a way to control our relationship dynamic that she had apparently never considered what would happen if I stopped being afraid of her leaving. Instead of spending the evening calling Diana and begging her to return, I spent it making phone calls to credit card companies and financial institutions. I canceled the credit cards that were tied to my accounts but carried Diana's name, ensuring that she would no longer have access to my income for her discretionary spending. I also contacted our bank and removed her access to our joint checking account, effectively cutting off all financial support that I had been providing for her comfortable unemployment. These actions weren't taken out of spite or anger, but rather as logical consequences of Diana's decision to leave our marriage. If she were truly independent and didn't want to be in a partnership with me, then she should be responsible for supporting herself financially rather than continuing to benefit from my income while rejecting any reciprocal responsibilities or commitments. I also began researching divorce attorneys and the legal requirements for ending our marriage in our state. If Diana was serious about leaving and not contacting me again, then I wanted to make sure that our separation was handled properly from a legal and financial perspective rather than allowing it to remain in an ambiguous state that might complicate matters later. For days, I heard nothing from Diana. I went to work as usual, managed our household by myself, and began adjusting to the reality of living alone after 11 years of marriage. The house felt different without her constant presence and demands, but it wasn't unpleasant. If anything, it was peaceful in ways that I had forgotten were possible. But on Friday morning, 3 days after Diana had left with such dramatic finality, I heard knocking at our front door. When I answered it, I found Diana standing on our doorstep, clearly distressed in ways that suggested she had been forced to confront the practical realities of supporting herself without access to my income and resources. She began begging me to let her back into the house and to restore our marriage, apologizing for leaving and promising that she would never threaten to leave again. She claimed that she had learned her lesson about taking our marriage and my support for granted, and that she was ready to be a better partner who contributed more meaningfully to our domestic life. But Diana's panic and distress weren't primarily motivated by missing me or realizing that she valued our marriage. They were motivated by her discovery that I was already making arrangements to divorce her and that her comfortable lifestyle was in jeopardy due to the financial changes I had implemented. During her 3-day absence, Diana had apparently tried to use the bank access that she had grown accustomed to having, only to discover that these resources were no longer available to her. She had been forced to rely on her limited savings and the charity of friends for basic needs like food and shelter, giving her a quick education in what her life would look like without my financial support. She had also somehow learned that I had been consulting with divorce attorneys. The realization that I was taking concrete steps to legally end our marriage, rather than simply waiting for her to return on her own terms, had apparently shocked her into understanding that her familiar pattern of threats and manipulation was no longer effective. Diana's attempts to reconcile were desperate and manipulative, alternating between promises of reform and attempts to guilt me into resuming our previous dynamic. She promised that she would find employment immediately, that she would contribute more to our household, and that she would never again threaten to leave during disagreements. But her promises rang hollow because they were motivated by panic about her financial security rather than genuine recognition of the problems in our relationship or commitment to addressing them. She wanted to return to the comfort and security that my support provided, but she wasn't offering any meaningful changes to the fundamental inequality and disrespect that had characterized our marriage for years. I told Diana that her dramatic exit 3 days earlier had been the final incident in a pattern of behavior that had made our marriage unsustainable for me. I explained that I was proceeding with the divorce as recognition that our relationship had become toxic and unequal in ways that couldn't be fixed by promises made under duress. Diana's response to my decision was to escalate her emotional manipulation, claiming that I was being cruel and unreasonable, that all marriages go through difficult periods, and that I was throwing away 11 years of history over a single argument. She seemed unable to understand that the issue wasn't the specific incident that had led to her departure, but rather the years of threats, manipulation, and entitlement that had gradually eroded my respect for her and my willingness to continue accommodating her demands. Over the following weeks, Diana made numerous attempts to change my mind about the divorce, alternating between promises of personal reform and threats about what the divorce process might cost me financially. She hired an attorney who advised her to claim that I had abandoned the marriage by changing the locks and cutting off her financial support, attempting to position herself as the victim of my unreasonable behavior. But the documentation of Diana's voluntary departure, combined with the history of her threats and manipulation, made it clear to both attorneys and eventually to the court that she had ended our marriage through her own choices and actions. Her pattern of threatening to leave whenever she didn't get her way, culminating in actually leaving, had created a clear record of her unwillingness to participate in a genuine partnership. The divorce process took several months to complete, but ultimately resulted in a settlement that reflected the reality of our financial situation and contributions during the marriage. Diana received some assets and temporary spousal support, but far less than she would have received if she had been able to claim that I had abandoned the marriage, or if she had been able to demonstrate genuine efforts to contribute to our partnership during the years leading up to our separation. Looking back on those 11 years of marriage, I can see that I had enabled Diana's manipulative behavior by consistently rewarding her threats with compliance and accommodation. My desire to avoid conflict and maintain surface-level peace had gradually created a dynamic where she felt entitled to control our relationship through emotional manipulation, and where I felt trapped by my own commitment to making the marriage work. The night when Diana announced that she was moving out and told me not to contact her again had actually been a gift, even though it didn't feel like one at the time. Her ultimatum had finally forced me to confront the reality that our marriage had become something that served her interests, while undermining my own well-being and self-respect. By responding fine, instead of falling into the familiar pattern of begging and apologizing, I had discovered that Diana's threats were primarily tools of control rather than genuine expressions of her willingness to end our marriage. She had grown so accustomed to using the fear of abandonment to get her way that she had never actually prepared for the possibility that I might accept her departure rather than fight to prevent it. The decision to cancel her access to financial support had been a practical response to her stated intention to end our marriage and not contact me again. If she was truly leaving and wanted independence, then she should have been prepared to support herself financially rather than expecting to continue benefiting from my income while rejecting the responsibilities that come with partnership. The woman who had spent years threatening to leave whenever she didn't get her way had finally discovered what happened when someone called her bluff and was prepared to accept the consequences of her threats. Sometimes the most important word you can say in a relationship is fine, especially when you mean it.